All right. Well, with that, welcome to Coffee with a Purpose, everyone. This morning, we are welcoming as she says, relatively still new pastor at First Congregational Church, Cindy Worthington Berry. Welcome, Cindy. Great to have you here. And in case anybody didn't see the rather long-winded announcement email this week, Cindy's actually, Reverend Cindy has queued up a topic for us to work on this morning, which she's titled Bridges and Bonds. And in her words, we are learning so much about the negative impact of isolation, and we're living with the negative impact of societal division. How do we uphold our values, create meaningful connections, and begin repairing our communities? There's no magic wand, but we'll think about this together and maybe even practice a little. So that sounds intriguing. Thank you for being with us. And for your benefit as much as anything, we can follow our usual custom of folks doing brief introductions, although I see an awful lot of First Church people this morning. No surprise. Martin, let's start with the folks that are physically there at MetroWorks.
Sure. Why don't we go in order with Kathleen? You understand?
Sure. I'm Kathleen Donovan. I've been a Natick resident for about 34 years. I'm librarian by training. I'm on the library's board of trustees. And I also volunteer with Keep Natick Beautiful.
Yeah, with Keep Natick Beautiful. Okay, got it.
I'm Martin Kessel. I'm the sort of host on site here, and since people talking about how long you've been a resident, I guess the total is 57 years, although part of that was not actually living here. And I'm active in town meeting and open space and a lot of other things around town.
Thanks, Martin.
Bill Ramage, active in Keep Natick Beautiful, Eco Natick. I'm on the board of Communities Preservation Committee, and I do a little tiny bit of work at First Church Natick.
I'm having lunch with you this week.
That's right.
I'm Donna McKenzie. I'm a town meeting member, a former school committee member, and maybe a kind of a general gadfly about town. And I've lived in Natick more years than I can count. My parents bought their home here in 1951, and I live in that home now. So I've always considered Natick home. So good to be here.
Thanks.
I'm Judy Dixon, and I've lived in Natick 30 years and have been involved in all kinds of things, including FCC, the Natick Public Schools, and most recently Family Promise Metro West. And of course, I was here last week with Danielle and thought that this would be a great place just to keep my ear to the ground on what is stirring our community.
And Judy, you can also do what I
At
do.
lunch.
Great job.
I watch recordings, which is a really great, like, to be able, if you miss a Monday, because I don't usually get to show up here on Mondays, but watching the recordings is also a great way to stay in touch.
And that's it.
That's it for the moment.
Yeah.
Great. Let's move on to Elaine.
Okay. Long-term involvement with the rights of people with disabilities internationally. I've traveled, I've spoken. I'm a grandmother, a widow, and I love groups. I show up.
Thanks, Elaine. Paul?
Good morning, Reverend. Your topic this morning is great. I was part of our church services yesterday at St. Linus with Father Chip, and also when I read the newsletter from the Boston Archdiocese, the pilot, it talked about your topic in that also. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your views on the topic. So thank you, and I look forward to working closer with you and your church.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. Carrie?
Hi, good morning. Let's see, a 21-year resident of Natick, and along with Pat and Bill Ramage, member of Keep Natick Beautiful. Let's see, what else should I do? Some property management, handyman work, done some work at Family Promise Metro West, and overall concerned environmentalist. And I'm having connectivity problems in my office. So I'm in a remote location. I'm probably gonna have to jump off in a little while, get those resolved so I can do some work that I have to do. But look forward to hearing some of what you have to say.
Thanks, Carrie.
Thanks, Carrie. Rick?
Morning, Cindy. I believe I met you at the talk that you gave at the church in the basement last summer, perhaps, or it was before you actually started. Anyway, I enjoyed your talk, and I'm particularly interested in your talk this morning because I heard the Robert Putnam, the author of Bowling Alone, last week on the Daily, the New York Times Daily, talking about bonds and bridges and isolation and so on. Very interesting talk. So looking forward to it. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Rick. Carol? Just got to come off mute, Carol.
How about that?
Perfect.
Thank you. So Carol Berkowitz, and I've lived in Natick, Cindy, over 50 years. I love the town, and I love the people that come to coffee. And I've done a lot of work on Lake Cochituate because I live on the lake, and town meeting member, lots of things about the town. So nice to meet you this morning.
Thanks, Carol.
And Carolyn?
Good morning. I'm still getting organized because I was away last week and I didn't get my computer set back up. I'm sorry. Carolyn Williams. I am very active member of the Natick Art Association, also active at First Church with LGBTQ justice work, and part of the Trail Steward system in Natick.
Thanks, Carolyn. I didn't know that.
Great.
And almost 50 years.
Terrific. Pat?
Good morning, and it's very nice to meet you. I've heard a little bit about you.
Same.
I'm a big fan of all the FCC team, Doug and Sarah and Bill and all these folks that I've met over the years. I was a huge fan of Vicky's. She was just like, so inspiring. So I'm Keep Natick Beautiful guy.
Thanks, Pat.
Just scratches the surface, Pat, from what I know.
It does indeed. Cindy Bates? Come off mute there, Cindy. There you go.
I'm at my mom's house where there was no water until 5 minutes ago when the guy from the town came and fixed it, put a new meter on. And anyway, I have to share a first name with you, Reverend Cindy. And I, for almost 5-year resident of Natick, right in the center. I'm a trail steward, and I am an occasional Keep Natick or upper person.
Thanks, Cindy. Sally?
Good morning, Cindy, Reverend Cindy, and everybody. I'm Sally Hopkins. I moved from San Diego to be back here in Natick with my brother, Pat Conaway, and he's kept me keeping Natick beautiful. He's kept me busy. But this is a marvelous group, and the CWAP people, Pat and I got Coffee with a Purpose started way back in 2000 something or other, 17, 18. But Doug and Sarah and Bill and Martin and really just brought it into a new space, and very much looking forward to hearing from you and about you, Cindy.
Thanks, Sally. What a gift you've given the community.
Thanks. Chris had said that she's driving but listening, so I don't know whether she can come off mute to say hi, but Chris is also an FCC member, so I know in Huge and Family Promise, so Cindy knows a bit about her already. Brinley.
Good morning. Brinley Vickers. I've lived in Natick for almost 24 years. I originally moved in and lived at the baseball factory, which I loved being a part of that history. I was on the Pay As You Throw task force and the recycling committee. I'm a town meeting member. I like to pay attention to what's going on in town. I'm definitely an environmental advocate and an advocate for our schools. And I'm really glad you're here and to do this project today. Thanks.
Thanks, Brinley.
Thanks, Brinley. And Gwen, I see you're with us this morning. Possibly away from the computer. Skip to Sarah. Sarah?
Hi, Sarah Hannah. Cindy knows me pretty well. Interested in all things Natick. Probably my biggest passion is environmental work, but always interested in hearing what everybody has to say.
Yeah, and Cindy, I think, knows me too well from about 8,000 church meetings, but we'll just leave it at that. I'm embarrassed to say, actually, in the riches of what you folks always all introduce yourselves involved with for volunteers. I do stuff for the church and I run this group, and that's about it. Sometimes Sarah drags me along on some of her stuff. So, welcome, Cindy. So happy to have you with us. And,
Thank you.
Yours.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad to be here. And Doug said there were only going to be a few people here today. So this is a great group. This is awesome. And it may change some of what we're going to do because of that. But my hope is that this might also be like the beginning of some conversations that I'm having with lots of you. So I just want to check on our time. Doug, does this usually go an hour or 90 minutes? I want to be respectful of everybody's time.
We often go right up until 10:30, and I'm glad you mentioned that, actually, because I had wanted to say at the outset that there's been some discussion about potential sessions leading up to the state primary, and then also preparing for fall town meeting and so forth. So for anyone interested, particularly in the topic of should we have some sessions in August about the state primary, stay on at the end. If you have until 10:30, but if you only have until 10, that's fine too.
Great. All right. So a couple things. I'm going to try to have the screen up as well as some of the notes I want to both take and share. So if you have like a question or a thought, you can do the hand raising thing, but it might even be easier to just talk so that I hear you. And Doug, I assume that if I'm missing anything, you'll smack me and let me know that I'm missing.
Yeah, so you're ready to take interruptions anytime.
Exactly.
What you say.
Cool with the interruptions. Absolutely. So a quick little bit about me. I arrived in Natick last October. I've been a pastor for almost 28 years. Please feel free to call me Cindy. You don't have to call me Reverend Cindy. I know some people, particularly when they've got their young kids, they want to call me Reverend Cindy because they want to sort of model that for their kids, but I'm totally fine with Cindy Bates. I don't know if you're actually Cynthia, but technically my name is Cynthia Louise. So when I hear Cynthia, I know I'm in trouble, but I'm totally fine with Cindy. In my 28 years or so in ministry, I've particularly loved diverse congregations. My specialty for the first half was what we call ecumenical shared ministry, which means churches that are affiliated with more than one denomination. And I have really loved that because I sort of feel like if a church is affiliated with more than one denomination, it kind of breaks open what a church can be thinking about and who can belong. And I think more and more now, all churches are ecumenical shared ministries with folks from all different backgrounds and traditions. But that's one of the things I really enjoy. My last church was in Boxborough, Mass. I was there for 11 years. Boxborough is a small town, if you don't know it, and we were the only religious community with a building. Obviously, lots of religions represented in the town, but we were the only one with a building. And there also really weren't other agencies or nonprofits there. So the church was pretty much it. We managed a lot of things for the town, along with lots of partners and collaborators. But what a different experience to be coming to Natick, where there's so many religious communities, so many agencies, so much going on. This is the first time I've been able to walk from my office to get a cup of coffee in my years of ministry. So I'm just really enjoying this new this new setting. So I want to talk a little bit today with you about conflict and communication. We're calling it bridges and bonds, and we could talk more. It sounds like one of you, maybe Rick, had heard a little bit about this bridges and bonds discussion that's going on, but I want to start for a little bit with conflict. I'm wondering how you folks personally approach conflict. So there's enough of you that I'm not going to ask you to get off mic and share with me, but who, if you just raise your hand, and I think I can see most of the people on site too. So if you're on camera, who loves a debate? Who is like, bring it on. I want to, okay, Sally loves a debate. All right, Brinley, I think Pat, did you raise your hand too? You are like, bring it on. That's what I want. Okay. Who welcomes a little bit of conflict, likes the chance to create connections, is willing to kind of lean in to conflict a little bit? Raise your hand. I got Carolyn, Carrie, folks at MetroWorks. All right, who is going to avoid a conflict at all costs? Doug has both of his hands up. Carol. Okay, that's me. I hate conflict. I would like to do anything I can to avoid conflict. When I was getting ready to go into ministry, you have to have a psychological assessment. Everybody does, not just me. And the person doing the assessment said, after all this battery of psychological tests, he said, I see you want to do everything you can to avoid conflict, and you are going to have to get over it. He said, you're going to have to deal with so much conflict. You better start working on that now. So I have been working on it, for almost 30 years now. And I would much rather keep the peace. I would much rather do everything I can so that everybody is happy. Obviously, that is not possible. Any of you who've been involved in a religious community equals conflict. Bring a group of humans together, there's going to be conflict. But just life is full of conflict too, right? So even if I had managed to avoid it in religious communities, I would have it in life. So here's what we know. Avoiding conflict makes things worse. All this research that we're seeing about silos and isolation, our tendency to try to stay with our own tribe, to stay in our own groups, just makes the conflict worse and worse. We might get to avoid it in the moment, but it doesn't help us long term. It just cements the things that caused the conflict in the first place. Is that familiar to folks? Can you like wave some hands at me or something? Like, yeah, I've heard this. I don't like it, but I'm aware of it. Okay. We've, at least I've experienced the implications of that. Really rough family gatherings, right? Like you're so worried at Thanksgiving that somebody is going to bring up one of the topics that it's going to just decimate the rest of the meal. And we've seen the violence. The most recent presidential assassination attempt is just one example of the violence that I think comes from this, the combination of having lots of conflict, but not dealing with it together. Have you seen in your life ways in which our avoidance, our lack of dealing with the conflict has made things worse? Again, I won't ask you all to come off mute, but thumbs up if you've seen some of that in your own life and maybe in your town too. Yeah. Brinley, are you raising your hand because you have a thought?
No, I was just agreeing with you because I'm not on camera and you can't see me.
Perfect. I just didn't want to miss anything.
It looks like Cindy might have a
I do.
question.
I didn't raise my hand when you did the poll because I'm not really sure, but I do, with my cousin, I'm involved in managing a family property, and a lot of times she doesn't do stuff, and I sort of vacillate from calling her on it or just letting it like not happen.
Yeah.
And I like, do I, and then I build up resentment or I, I don't know. And so I'm not really sure how, because she gets all embarrassed, and she doesn't do things. The more I might mention something, the more she doesn't do it. And so I've just more taken the tactic of just like letting it go, and eventually it'll have to get done or whatever. And so this is very interesting. I guess I'll just say this is very interesting to me.
Yeah, it looks like Rick maybe wants to comment.
Yeah, go ahead, Rick.
You're on mute at the moment, Rick, but
I-
yeah.
Okay. Yes, hi Cindy. I don't want to let any air out of the conflict discussion, but I find in my life, most of what seems like conflict really either isn't conflict, or it's me being stubborn, or it's not really very important anyway. So maybe that's more about my life than it is about conflict. I get the larger point of your drift, which is that there are very important issues that happen to us personally and beyond. So I don't think of myself as a person who is drawn to conflict, but I'm certainly there if conflict is necessary. I just think we conflate things into conflict that could be done. Conflict can be done diplomatically. But carry on with your discussion. Thanks. I didn't mean to go on.
I think this might touch on Cindy's situation too, but it's, for me, I think a lot of it is whether you expect anything to change. It's like you can just accept things as they are. And actually, we are supposed to accept that not everybody is the same as us. So, maybe it ties into hope of, is anything going to be different by meeting it head on versus just accepting it?
Yeah, and so I think we've just had three important things. So let me start with Rick's first. Like, we could spend a whole hour on what conflict is and kind of break that down. I 100% am using that in a very sort of vague blanket term. We could talk about, I was thinking like, we could talk about like tension, right? We could talk about problem solving. So I'm using a very broad swath right now in order to talk about it, in part because of, more about what I'm seeing, and I think what we're all experiencing in our communities and nationally, the sort of division and thinking about the tension that results, that both causes that and results from it. But totally, there are, I guess one of the things is I think that some of the same things that when there's big conflict that we react to also have to do with the same behaviors that come up for us when there's something we could just deal with head on or tell someone how we're feeling. Like sometimes it is similar dynamics that relate to both. And I think Cindy's given us some good examples of that. And Cindy, I just want to say, I hear that difficulty, things need to get done. You also care about your relationship with this person, and you see the resentment that's building up inside of you. Now, another time we could do some like case studies together and talk about how you might deal with something like that. What is a way to deal with a conversation like that that is more likely to, address the three different conflicting ideas that are going on there? But for right now, I just want to say, like, hearing all that tension, right? Like you've got competing goods there. You need the stuff to get done. You care about your cousin and you don't want to feel like crap. So how do you, which of those is more important? How do you focus on them? How do you deal with them all? Does that at least feel like, I don't know, at least you've been heard, Cindy? Does that?
I think I pretty much came to the conclusion that I can just like let her do what she does, and I can, occasionally get a little bit irritated, and then I just like that can't change her. So
and then what do you do with the irritation?
And if
right?
stuff doesn't get done, like it's not my problem, right? It's not my problem.
Yeah. Awesome. So as I've continued to work on these things, I went on sabbatical. Are folks familiar with the idea of sabbatical? Every 5 years to 7 years, oftentimes clergy are given time to go and study and focus. So in 2019, I went off on sabbatical, and it was really for me about wading in on some of this, both this conflict piece and the communication piece. My sabbatical was called Building the Beloved Community. because that was the goal. It's always the goal. And I did a bunch of training with organizations like Essential Partners, Braver Angels, Living Room Conversations, and community circle processes. The best part was I spent 2 weeks at the US-Mexico border. I was in Nogales, Arizona, and Nogales, Mexico. There's always lots of conflict around immigration in the country. It was particularly high in 2019. And as a pastor in Massachusetts, at that point, the conflict that I was seeing in my town and in my congregation around immigration was about immigration over there at the southern border. I am involved with lots of immigration issues now, and it's interesting. Immigration is such a local issue these days. Sometimes it's hard for me to remember back when immigration was really talking about more things that were happening at the southern border. So I came back from that sabbatical with lots of ideas and tools and plans, particularly out of the trainings that I had about how we can work together to talk about things that we disagree about and things that we're struggling with. And the congregation was like, yes, we totally want to do that. But then when it came time to actually sign up for some of these practices and sit down and do it, they showed resistance, which I thought was totally understandable and yet caught me off guard. There were 2 themes of response in that resistance. One was, it is too scary to be honest. It's not safe. I don't feel like I can't tell people what I really think. If I start telling people, then all of our relationships are going to break apart. I can't afford that. It is better to be silent about it than to risk the danger that would come up if I shared. And the other was trying to understand the other side is a distraction from doing justice. If I'm spending my time trying to understand the other, then that's a distraction from what my most important values are. So I just want to check in. Does that make sense? First of all, like my description of the 2 themes of response? Yeah? Okay. And you don't have to admit anything, but can you relate to one of those more than the other? Like when you think about something.
First for me.
Yes.
I can totally say it's the first one for me personally, and I feel like it's the second one for my family. Like I feel like I come from a very dysfunctional family, and I really feel like a lot of that is because of the second reason, and I'm the first reason.
Really, I love your description of how those 2 can weave together, right? Like it's not necessarily just one or the other. They can impact each other. Yeah. So, sorry, Rick, go ahead. But unmute first.
Sorry. Yeah, I would say the first one also. But regarding the second one, I found enormous peace in trying to, over the last 9 years, and trying to understand what is behind Trumpism. And, I've gotten to progressive levels of peace with it. And I think that makes me more able, perhaps, to feel okay, to feel safe when talking to people who have real issues with the way things have been working. And because I no longer feel like I just want to shake my head and go, what in the world are you talking about? Which is what I was doing in 2015 and 2016. And I vowed after that I was never going to go through another election like that, feeling like that.
Are you willing to share, one of the ways in which you were able to grow in that understanding? Like, were you reading articles? Were you talking to people? Were you doing like guided meditation as if you were a Trump supporter?
No to the guided meditation, probably not formally anyway. I do some meditation, but really most of it's come from reading and listening and hearing interviews with various people, and even listening to I thought the interviews just last week with people at the GOP convention were very interesting, and I can, what people were saying without going into detail, that people were feeling like the shot that nearly hit him had hit them. And there were, this sort of relational understanding, they have personalized their, identification with Donald Trump. And I think understanding how that works has been key to lowering my temperature.
And I just want to say that I think lowering our temperature is a big part of what it's all about. Cindy even talked about it in her conflict with her, or, what she's dealing with her cousin. Some of the decisions she made lowered her temperature, so that I can imagine now when she's trying to talk to her cousin about what needs to be done, her conversation is less fraught. I'm somebody like Rick. I like to do a lot of pre-work. So if I'm struggling with why something is happening in our country, in our community, I want to go read stuff, because reading feels safe to me. I can read what somebody has written and argue with it in my head, or let it come in a way that feels like it deals with that the too scary to be honest side, because I can sort of step in. I do think then, and Rick may have said this as well, then having the one-on-one conversations actually then helps us see each other as human, right? So it's not just watching the faces on the screen talking, but it's knowing our neighbors. This became, oh, sorry, Bill.
Regarding that first issue, I think trust becomes a critical issue as well. If you trust someone, it's much easier to disagree with them in love, or whatever you want to call it. But if you don't, it's much harder. How does trust fit in?
Yeah, I think that's really key. So, and it's a chicken and egg thing too, right? Because how do you build trust without having sort of taking baby steps and seeing that you can build trust together? I think one of the things that happened in 2016, at least in my congregation, was folks had ideas about each other, and they had put each other in categories, rightly or wrong, whether or not that's a good thing to do. We know that's what humans do. We know that's part of the function of our reptilian brain, is we need to know, who's safe and who's a stranger. And we put people in a particular category because that's what helps us function in the world. And then some things happened in 2016, at least in my congregation, that for some people in my congregation, they said, oh, that person's not in the safe category anymore, and now they're dangerous. And so trust was immediately broken for people on both sides in all different ways. And so once the trust is gone, then how do we rebuild trust? A lot of it is by having those conversations. Now, part of what we can do is, all right, if there's something I want to understand better, or conversations I want to have, who is the person I trust that I can have some of those, that I can get the closest to those conversations with? One of the things I wanted to make sure I said before we were done, but I'm just going to say it right now, is it is not safe for all people at all times to have all conversations, especially in the face of so much racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, persecution of the LGBT community. It is not the responsibility of a targeted population to endure conversations, right? So we are not talking about any of us being willing to have any conversation at any time. Safety is definitely a priority. But that doesn't mean we don't keep practicing whatever conversations wherever we can. So maybe a Trump supporter and a Harris supporter aren't going to talk about it over lunch, but maybe a Red Sox fan and a Yankees fan can have a little bit of a conversation about that. And maybe we practice, maybe that's even harder, I don't know, but practice some of those conversations so we grow the muscle of being able to lower our temperature, as Rick said, when we're having conversations about things that are important to us, about which we disagree with folks. Bill, I don't know if that really got at the trust issue, but I just want to say, you know, I definitely agree that trust is an important part of what we're talking about.
Thank you.
So while I
Did it for me. I mean, I think Bill's exactly right. And I like your term growing the muscle because, you know, once I lower my temperature, then I begin to see things. Then I can begin to empathize with somebody else's pain, even if it's not a pain that fortunately I don't personally share. But it's much easier to, you know, I also see the bias in the media that feed me. And I get, you know, when people sort of want to go off on a rant about something, I'm taking the time to just sort of say, whoa, 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 rather than feeding it and say, you know, there's some legitimate issues on the other side, and we need to pay attention to them. You know, this is not all one way. And I'm finding, you know, again, people who know me and trust me will stop and listen. And, you know, I can't say that I'm seeking engagement with avid, you know, with my next door neighbors, for instance, who have, you know, had Trump signs in on their cars and in their things and so forth, and are prone to, you know, launching into the latest diatribe. We're very friendly. And, you know, I overlook the fact that their politics are different and their background's different, but I'm not going to win an argument with them over this. They know our politics. They accept us. We do favors for each other. You know, that's the way it works. That's the way it should work, I think.
Yeah, I just want to sort of like, I know people have different views, but I just want to amplify what Rick said. So, you know, being able to be a good neighbor with someone who disagrees with you in a whole bunch of strong ways is one of the ways in which we build those bridges, right? Is it the biggest bridge of like, oh, now we understand each other perfectly and we're going to hold hands and sing kumbaya, woo? No, but it is part of the fabric of nurturing those bridges together, especially in contrast to what some people are calling the bonds. Now, bonds to me has always sounded like a nice thing, right? We have bonds to each other. Bonds weave us together. But these days, one of the ways we're talking about bonds are the things that hold together people who already agree strongly about things. And if you just keep cementing the bonds within your group without bridging to other groups, then you just get more and more siloed in your group. So what Rick is talking about is, you know, he's going to build that little bridge to the neighbor that feels differently. He doesn't need to, spend all his time driving back and forth on that bridge, but that bridge exists. And that's part of what we need to do in our society. Now, again, if the neighbor had signs up that said, all Ricks are bad, then it would not be Rick's responsibility in any way to try to make a bridge there. It wouldn't be safe for Rick to do so. But maybe the neighbor on the other side could be talking to the anti-Rick neighbor and be working on building some of those bridges. Now, again, some of you might be thinking like, I'm totally Pollyanna, but is it at least making sense what I'm saying so far? Cool. So I was talking about how it was Donna.
I had my hand up. I was agreeing with what you said, but I want to go a little bit further and say that sometimes, I mean, it isn't safe for people who are victims of racism, LGBTQ or whatever, and that's a real issue. But it can also be the issue that those who have been abused become the abuser. And people have to make decisions because, is it Reinhold Niebuhr who said, what people do together is much worse than what they do individually? And that has been my experience actually in town groups and town organizations, that when they go bad, they can go very badly. And it's important to know when something becomes toxic and how to reform it, when to leave, and to be kind in the midst of that, because we have a lot of mental illness in our world. I mean, we're probably all mentally ill in our own ways, right? So I have to offer that caveat, but there are some instances where it just becomes harder and untenable. I mean, I have a neighbor who said, oh, I called the town about your tree because it's dropping leaves in my yard and on my car. And I've asked the town to come and cut your tree. And I just thought, did I just wake up in the twilight zone? I mean, there just are some situations that are really difficult, and it's, how do we like grow our patience and our own resiliency and care for ourselves in the midst of those situations? I mean, there's only so many instances, for example, I can tolerate being called a white racist. I'm trained as a minister, and I spent my whole life working on social justice stuff. So I just think, you point to something that's difficult, and, you know, the braver angels strategy, it doesn't always work.
No. So first of all, so many things there. And I just want to say, Donna, I'm also, I see the pain, right? And especially for volunteers who give so much of themselves to the community or to an organization. And then, like you said, when things go bad, the pain of that, I just think is intense. Like, it's one thing to deal with it at work where you're paid, but another place where you have given your heart, where you live, where you would like to feel safe and connected. That's a whole other layer of difficulty. I think we could have another conversation around boundaries and how we set boundaries and hold boundaries, and how boundaries are necessary for any of the things that I'm talking about here regarding how we deal with conflict, how we deal with tension, how we communicate with each other. None of this means we don't have, it's not anybody having any conversation with anyone at any time. That's not what we're talking about, because there's all sorts of reasons not to, from mental illness to cruelty to aggression, to just like being done, not having anything left to give in a situation. But part of what I love about being in a community is ideally one of us can tap out and somebody else can tap in and have the capacity for it. But yeah, I just want to say, none of this says, none of this has a should attached to it. None of this is, you should do this. Part of what we're talking about is, if you think you are called to try to do some bridge building, what might be some ways to do that, as opposed to everybody should do this and here's how to do it. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, and those are great questions. And now you have me thinking, oh, part 2 on boundaries would be great with you. So
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I am a huge fan of boundaries, and particularly, if we're going to do hard work, we need to have boundaries that keep us and each other safe. Yeah. Just the last thing I was going to say about sort of looking to the past was this, my sabbatical ended in 2019. Well, we all know what happened in 2020. So efforts with my congregation to try to get them to like lean in and do some hard work around conflict got way harder during COVID, while there were even more opportunities than ever to be working on that. In Acton Boxborough, the school system where the church was located, they were in the middle, as COVID hit, they were in the middle of changing their mascot for reasons of respect to Indigenous communities, which is something I know Natick can really relate to. So those debates and anger were happening, in the midst of COVID. So while my congregation, who is fabulous, sort of kept saying, we really want to work on this stuff, but it makes us really nervous, I had plenty of opportunities to keep working on it on my own. So I just want to say, we are about halfway through our time together. I I want to keep going with these conversations. I want to say we may or may not get any time to practice this today. And I hope that's okay, because I'm going to like show you one of the tools that could be used. And then if there's folks who want to like actually practice this with me sometime, I would love, in a not coffee with a purpose time, set something up and we could do that. Does that sound okay to folks?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Terrific.
All right. So
Pat, did you want to say something?
oh, I missed it.
Oh, just saying yes. Okay. Yeah. Gotcha.
So in a dangerous question moment, what do you feel is tearing apart folks the most right now when you look at your communities in the world? What are you most worried about? Just pop some things out.
For me, I think it's, I'll say the other side, that political disagreement seems to be going into this realm of violence. You know, some of the most recent reporting is, even if the Democrats somehow are able to pull off an election win, is anybody going to accept it? You know, what's really going to happen?
So political disagreement moving into violence. That's well encapsulated.
I think that political disagreement, political difference is becoming incredibly personal. So you're challenging me to build bridges with people who think differently than me. That's totally cool. Like, I love that. I celebrate and enjoy the challenge of diversity. But are you asking me to connect to people who believe in things that are so deeply intrinsic to my value system? That, you know, I guess it is, you're challenging me to the ultimate kindness, right? But will that kindness validate beliefs that I cannot abide by?
Yeah. So the word values is sort of stuck in my head with what you said, Judy, you know, sort of like, you know, some sort of heavy distinction between core values feels hard, you know, and so somehow like different political labels have become synonymous with a set of values that might be really different. Does something like that sound right, Judy?
Yeah, I mean, I can yeah. I think there are political issues that we can sit at a table and discuss, even in a very impassioned way. But there are differences of belief, that for me have to do with right and wrong, and that in this country, what we believe to be ethical and right and wrong is so differentiated. It feels so heavy and impossible to connect back around smaller things.
I am right there with Judy on that one. I feel like for me, for years now, there's been a meme going around that says, agree to disagree is for when you're talking about coffee or tea or pineapple on pizza, but not when you're talking about deep morals. And I'm amazed at the conversations and the ground standing that happens in that conversation specifically about that. And I do feel like it's exactly what Judy was saying. It's like, I can't agree to disagree with you when I feel like it's actually really devaluing my core system. And I understand that you think that that's your core system as well. That's where the fight is, you know?
Yeah. Cindy, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add to the original question. I think about Gaza, I think about Sudan, I think about Ukraine, and I think about the issues in around the world, but also especially in Latin America, that are making people leave because they can't stay where they are because they don't feel safe.
Yep. So I'm adding Sudan and Ukraine, although I think we could put those in some categories, but I'm adding the word Gaza, immigration. One more. I'm sort of surprised no one said no one has named any local issues. I don't know if that's because you don't feel like there are any hot local issues right now, or if you just don't want to bring them up.
I can say that as I worked extremely hard in the recent elections, that I am burned out on those local issues. And if they don't need to be brought up, I don't bring them up.
That's well said. Okay. So especially thinking about what Brinley and Judy were both talking about. These, you know, and again, we didn't, maybe in a smaller group or with a little more time, I would push to be more specific about what those basic understanding of right and wrong, like what we're talking about. You know, we could be talking about issues around race, immigration, LGBTQ issues, things like that. Sorry, I don't want to miss what Chris just put in the chat. Look, people living in different realities, right? Like, so there's this core disconnect. So the things that I would say we need more than ever are curiosity, which includes listening, compassion, and this is the hard one, I think, that I would be asking for from Brinley and Judy. Compassion, even for those people who, you know, are so much on what we would think the wrong side of right and wrong, and the courage to share our own stories and values. So curiosity, compassion, and courage. And again, I just want to say, this does not mean everybody having every conversation on every topic all the time, but this is where can we have one more conversation in one more situation on one more topic. And you folks are already doing that. You people represent hope. Coffee with a Purpose gathers people to be curious and connect and practice compassion. So you are already doing the kinds of things that we are talking about. So I'm going to talk to you about one model for doing this that if we have time, we might practice a little bit, but we probably won't. This is living room conversations. Have folks heard of living room conversations? Okay, Carol has. So what I like about living room conversations, so Braver Angels, which I know some of you may have experienced, they were in Natick a few months ago. Braver Angels does such great work. Part of what they require people to say if they are red, blue, or purple. And I understand why they do that, but that means people sort of have to start from a stance of saying, you know, we're already in these silos. And Braver Angels are very good. That's very good for dealing with a complex subject that a community is struggling with, but it also takes a lot of work. I'm always looking for quick and easy tools I can use at a moment's notice. So that's what I like about living room conversations. They're very user-friendly. The organization gives you a complete outline of how to do it on a wide number of topics. So, you know, you can get some practice on some very like pineapple on pizza type conversations just to be practicing hearing each other. We could have another whole conversation about how crappy we are at listening to each other, how often we are working on what we're going to say in response while the other person is still talking. So just practicing that, like quieting the mind, hearing the other person, doing that active listening. Living room conversations helps work on that. And of course, they're called living room conversations because originally the idea was you invite 4 to 6 people into your living room and have a conversation. So many of these are now being done online thanks to COVID, but of course, there's nothing better than gathering in person when you can. So a living room conversation is 4 to 6 people for 90 minutes. You don't have to do any participation, any preparation in advance. And the host, the person who pulls the group together, also participates. So Brinley is asking if she has found it. She probably has, because yep, that's it right there.
Brinley is our resource for always posting links to everything that's being talked about. Thank you, Brinley.
I love a Googler. I am going to share my screen. Just for those of you who it's helpful for you to see, and you might not even be able to see it, but for those of you for whom it's helpful to see that. So living room conversation process has 3 parts. I think it's 3 parts. Yeah, I think it's 3 parts. So the first is an introduction, sharing your name, where you live, what you're used to the conversation. And then the next section, it's these conversation agreements that the group takes turns reading. And maybe just even these conversation agreements would be helpful for us in our communities. So especially if you can't see the document, I'm just gonna like read the bold face. Usually in a living room conversation, people go around, take turns reading one of these. So be curious and listen to understand. Again, notice it starts right out with like, be curious, what Rick was talking about earlier. Why does someone believe what they believe? Show respect and suspend judgment. I know this is really hard, but not already telling ourselves a story about why somebody believes what they believe, but for a minute, just being willing to start from the place of why would a thoughtful, reasonable person believe or act this way? The third conversation agreement is noting any common ground as well as any difference. That's what they're inviting you to do through the whole process. We generally find that to be a helpful thing. Okay, so we can all agree we care about families. All right, we care about our families. That being the case, you know, maybe that gives us a foundation for talking about what we disagree about. Be authentic and welcome that from others. This is what we talked about, how hard this is, especially, you know, when we want to avoid conflict. If it doesn't feel safe, if we don't have that trust, it can be really hard to be authentic, but trying to practice being authentic and speaking your truth in the midst of these conversations. Be purposeful and to the point, i.e. don't go on and on. Own and guide the conversation, knowing that you have a responsibility for helping to make this conversation go well. And you want to do, you know, what you say and the tone you bring really makes a difference. All right, let me see. Then there are these question rounds, and I'm just going to stop the share for a second so I can see you and tell you about these question rounds. So this is the heart of the living room conversation. So round one is getting to know people, just as a little bit of a warm up to practice listening to people. So people answer one of these three questions. What are your hopes and concerns for your family, community, or the country? What would your best friend say about who you are? Or what sense of purpose or mission or duty guides you in your life? So just some getting to know you type questions, but also at a slightly deeper level than, you know, who you are and how many years you've lived in Natick. You know, going just to that next deeper level. Round two explores the topic. We're going to come back to that in a second. And then round three simply reflects on the conversation. People are invited to share what was most meaningful for them in the conversation, most valuable to them, what new learning or understanding or common ground was found in the topic, and how has the conversation changed your perception of anyone in the group, including yourself, and is there a next step? So just sort of wrap up questions. All right, so would you like to try a round two question?
Sure.
Okay. So I have not sufficiently figured out the names of everybody in the room. It's Judy, Bill. Who else is it? Judy, Bill, Carolyn.
No, everybody
Kathleen,
Kathleen
And Donna.
Donna.
And,
Yep.
And
So
Mark.
we also have Doug and Sarah and Elaine.
No, I know that. I just need the people. It's the people.
Oh, they're in the room at MetroWorks.
Martin.
Judy, Bill, Kathleen, Donna.
Martin.
Martin, thank you. Okay. All right. Erica, did I see your hand up? You're on mute. I don't know if I'm missing anything you wanted to share.
There we go.
I just wanted to make sure, I didn't know if I was connected. And, so that's.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're still having problems hearing you, Ricky, but
Oh, Ricky, that's Ricky, right? Not
Ricky.
Erica. Right. All right. Ricky, I'm so sorry. I can't hear you, but I'm so glad you're here. So, I'm wondering if we should just have me and the people who are in the room at MetroWorks do this. Does this sound okay? And everybody else can listen? People in MetroWorks, are you all willing to do that? Bill just got.
Yeah,
nervous.
we could do it.
Depends on the question.
You can always say pass. So I will go first, and then I'm gonna call on you. So you're gonna go in this order, just so you know. Judy, Bill, Kathleen, Donna, Martin. Okay? Somebody say okay. Judy, it's all right. You're fine. You're just really the only two people I can really see.
Doing it first or last is better, that's
I
all.
don't know. We'll
He
find
got
out.
last, I got first. We'll figure it out later.
I can see Judy and Bill. I can't see everybody else as well.
They usually pop in when we say something,
Yes.
eventually. Yeah.
Yep. There we go. Okay. Here's the question. What have you done to stay connected with people you care about who have different political perspectives? I'm going to put it in the chat. The question is, maybe I'm going to put it in the chat. Pasting is hard. What have you done to stay connected with people you care about who have different political perspectives? And if we were doing the living room conversation, we would have already introduced ourselves like we have here today. We would have done that starting warm up question, and we would know we each have about a minute or two to share. So keep your response to a minute or two, and just know that a minute or two is a very short amount of time. So I'm going to start with the question, what have you done to stay connected with people you care about who have different political perspectives? So this has been certainly challenging for me with extended family, especially because I'm often talking publicly about my political perspectives. So lots of times my extended family knows more about what I believe than I know about what they believe. And because I spend a lot of my day-to-day life dealing with differences of opinion in these conversations, I'm often too tired to talk about it with my extended family. So I am often instead spending what energy I have with extended family thinking about the things that we do have in common and spending time talking about those, which often means we're talking about like my mom, my mother-in-law, and how we care about them and how we need to care with them in the future. So I'm kind of avoiding the topic with them, to be perfectly honest, but trying to stay connected. Judy, how about you?
So if I take the question apart, I could say that I'm like #winning, but when you put the question together, I'm a total loser. So I stay connected to people with different political perspectives by diving in and doing a lot of reading and listening to a lot of podcasts and trying to understand what drives people who think fundamentally different than me, and seeking that sort of empathy about how they arrived at that way of thinking. So 5 stars there. And then 5 stars for staying connected to my entire family who thinks fundamentally different than me by completely not discussing any of the things that I've done to try to understand them.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, what matters is you have done that work to try to understand them, which, oh my God, look at, I just did exactly what we're not supposed to do. I'm just starting to do crosstalk with Judy. So I am here to show you what not to do. Bill?
This is tough. I guess I kind of live in a silo with my friends all agree with me on major political issues. The only thing I can suggest is I think my son and I just agree on most things, but he insists that I understand the other side, which is extremely helpful. So in doing that, it would be listening to podcasts, listening to people who have different views, and then having a conversation. But there's no real stress there because I think we agree it's just a matter of his intellectual curiosity forces me to out of my comfort zone, let's put it that way.
Kathleen?
So I would say, like Bill, my friends are probably, I'm in a silo with particular political persuasion, so there's not discomfort there. I do have extreme difference with the family that I see most often. And it's a question where the politics, the difference there is driven by a single issue. and the single issue for them is religious based. So I think it's just, I've realized this is not a negotiable place, that their political beliefs are grounded in religious beliefs, and we have to just agree to differ. And I think that we've done a good job of respecting each other and just saying, this is probably something we don't talk about because it's not going to change.
Thanks, Kathleen. Donna.
This has been a tough year for me, and I've experienced a lot of deaths, and I recently had a cousin who died, my Trumpster cousin, and he had had a liver transplant, and then subsequently, I believe, drank through his new liver. And I was helping clean out his estate, which was my grandmother's house in Brookline once upon a time. It was now a hoarding situation. There were 19 guns that he owned, hidden throughout different places in that house. And how did I get along with him? I did not do a lot of research. I'm not interested, not that I read all of the time. I mean, I'm kind of a proponent of Karl Barth. You preach with the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. The newspaper's here. I just didn't go there with him, but he was very lonely. He needed company. And it turned out I was the last person who took him out for dinner. And he ate like he hadn't eaten in a couple of months. And did I have money to take him out to dinner? No, but I did it. So I just tried to be kind and not engage in conversations in which we're not going to agree. And sometimes I would let him rant. I would let him rant about how we're all going to get SARS and we don't need vaccinations. And I'm like, and it wasn't that he was stupid, he was really smart, but I just didn't feel like going there. And I have other Trumpsters in my family, and I just don't feel like going there. But kindness also has its cost, because when you're kind to people, you get accused of normalizing things that are unsavory. And people unfriend you because, there's sides that are so clear in their head. And life to me is gray. And I'm glad I was able to take him out to dinner. So the short of it is, I just try to look underneath and be nice.
Martin.
I'm sort of thinking like I'm usually with my wife when we get into these things, and we have very different approaches. What happens if we meet a friend who is a Trump supporter? I could talk about that, but we've also come across in our travels a number of Palestinians, and sort of the same thing happens there, where we start off by maybe asking if they have family back in either in the West Bank or Gaza, and how they're feeling about that, and that's fine. And then we may say that we have more distant family in Israel and how we're feeling about that. But what happens is my wife will start to argue about how to solve the situation, which of course only escalates. There's no way that you're going to have a 5-minute conversation and solve the problem. So it keeps going on and on, and makes me more exacerbated, and I assume the other people as well.
So thanks to the group for who are on site at Metro West for responding. And you can see, like, I very purposely chose a question that was not like conflict ridden or anything like that, but just to have that. And again, you folks are so good at that anyway, the practice of everybody answering a question and being heard by the group. And I know you all know each other really well, so maybe there was no new information in there for any of you, but especially those of you, listening on Zoom, but as well in the room. Did you hear anything there that was not something you already knew about the folks or impacted how you look at things? Cindy?
Everything was new. I mean, I know these people only from what we do. Mostly we listen on Monday mornings. And I know pretty much how long everybody's lived in Natick and what their volunteer jobs are. And that's kind of it.
Yeah.
Sure.
I thought it was also interesting to just hear people explain their motivations or their reasonings for doing things. I mean, we have to infer so much by what we observe other people doing. We might think we know why they're doing it, but to hear them name it is always, it can be a vulnerable thing to do. I applaud you all for doing it.
Yes. And especially, you know, when you hear some of the details in there, like Judy knowing she's doing work that her extended family will never be aware that she's doing nor appreciate that she's doing. When Donna is doing things that she knows, like express kindness in the world, but also other people would criticize her for doing. When Martin is feeling between the issue and his wife and whoever is they've just encountered, seeing people standing in those tricky moments that I still think have like competing values, the value to understand somebody, but also support somebody, the value to say what you believe, but also be in relationship. And as Donna has mentioned a few times today, that's exhausting. That is so stressful and so tiring. And so to be able to practice some of that together and support each other in that work, not just, the debating of the topics, but also supporting each other in the work of how we talk about it and how we communicate with each other.
Cindy?
Yeah.
Cindy?
Yep.
I think the other thing I observed is that there's just a lot more conflict in our lives than we may realize, that it's there. It's just there for everyone. And that's tough.
Yeah. What does it mean to day in and day out be processing even just low level simmering conflict? What toll does that take on our lives? And knowing that uses up our patience and our resilience and our creativity, then we don't have as much of that left over for other things that also require it. Yeah.
Carol, did you want to mention something?
I think she's waving to somebody.
Oh, okay. Great. Reading the room better than me.
So I was thinking, Doug, rather than getting into another little side thing, I think I'll wrap up a little early, which gives you folks time to talk about upcoming plans. I have just a few more things to say, but before I get into that, I want to see if anybody else has thoughts, observations, rebuttals.
I guess it's one thing that comes up for me is, several people mentioned we live in such a silo that, we're mostly surrounded by people who do agree with us. And I struggle sometimes to know, I have spent years trying to understand the mindset of the other side, and I don't know really kind of a way that doesn't feel very forced to even find somebody who feels like discussing this with me. I would say for me, that's a big challenge, that I just am surrounded by so many like-minded people.
Yeah. Well, you can go visit Judy's family. and Judy would also appreciate that, probably.
Beautiful, sunny Florida.
Right? So I think there's a couple things. One of the things that Braver Angels found was that it was a lot easier to find people who call themselves blue. It was a lot easier to find blue participants than red participants. And looking at it sort of psychologically, which again, let's just be clear, this is pretty much made up. It's based on no research, but the people who have a tendency to be like open about different ways of life and being and sexuality may also be more open to conversations about how we come to this, where people who are like, this is traditional, this is what's to be expected, may not want to have as many conversations about it. Now, I just want to say there was a lot of generalizations in that statement, but it's part of what we're trying to figure out, like how to encourage folks who might identify more as red to participate in conversations without, you know, feeling like they're being set up.
Yep.
And I don't have a quick answer for that. I do think, you know, Rick has pointed us to some of it, like how do we go and like listen to things that have been said by other people. The other thing is, I think it's that muscle piece. Sarah, I can probably find someone for you who doesn't think we should be making financial investment in what will help to slow climate change. So a conversation with somebody who, you know, may agree with you in a lot of ways, but doesn't want to invest in like, so that would, like, knowing that that is something important to you and that that's something that's important, that might be a place you would.
It's funny you mention that, because on Earth Day, I did encounter somebody that I have known for years who turns out not to believe in climate change. And I had a conversation and I was flabbergasted. It was just fascinating but again, this is somebody I have known for decades, was totally gobsmacked that this person held this belief. And I was like, wow, that was really interesting. I don't know if I persuaded him of anything, but it was interesting to have that conversation.
It's interesting you use the word persuade, because it sounds like the goal of a lot of these braver agent conversations is not to persuade. And in fact, if you're trying to get someone from the other side to engage, maybe it's like that's got to be one of the rules. Nobody is going to try to change anybody's mind. What we're trying to do is understand each other.
I will say that on Earth Day, I felt like I had a little bit of a right to persuade.
Well, yeah, right. I shouldn't say that those kind of conversations aren't important to have. But if someone's reluctant, Cindy, you want to
Go ahead,
say something?
Reverend Cindy, you go first, because
I do just want to say, and maybe Cindy, this aligns with what you were going to say, but there are times we are called to be like an upstander and work to, you know, be prophetic and right. And there are times we are called to try to build understanding.
Yes.
And I don't think we, you know, it's sort of like, again, I come back to sort of what Donna was talking about. If she takes her cousin out for dinner, does that mean she has now signed on to everything he believes? No. Can we accept enough nuance to be able to have one conversation with someone that is about trying to slap them upside the head about, you know, the scientific support for climate change, and another conversation, even with the same person, that says, this is me, I'd like to understand more, not persuade more.
Yep.
And are we capable of doing both?
Yep. I absolutely agree.
I know Cindy Bates wanted to say something, and also I see Brindley's got her hand up too. But
so
Cindy.
I have two friends who are pretty conservative, and one of them is someone I've known her since grade school, and then we ended up going to the same college. And she has said that she appreciates, this is one of those questions, she appreciates that I don't try to change her mind. And I think she feels when people do try to do that, she feels kind of trapped, like, or, you know, like wrong. And I mean, she's a lovely person. And the other thing I've come to know about her is in every cell of her body, she is just super conservative. She's scared to go places by herself. She's just gone through a divorce, and but she's just really, really I don't know what to say, closed-minded, but when you talked about, you know, people who are blue, open and wanting to get to, you know more things, that she's very comfortable with her morality that she was raised with. And like one example she said was that her mom and her mom's sister, who went to Smith College, like going to Smith College created this um, friction between the two sisters, because going to college opened her mother's sister's mind, and she thinks that's a bad thing, that you should keep the morals that you're raised with. And my parents sent me to college, to Smith College, to open my mind, to engage with the world and learn different things and be with different people. And I particularly sought out Smith because it was bigger than most of the really small private New England colleges. And I went broad to broaden my experience. And she just comes from a completely different place. And so we're good friends.
And the insight that might give you to someone who believes the things that she believes, because you stay in connection. Yeah. Brinley.
I just, this has brought up a lot of my own thoughts about the effort that some of us make to be in this, reaching out and trying to be compassionate and considerate and communicative. And then when it's actually okay to say, I've had enough of that and I need to step away from this now. And that it's okay for both sides, right? For all sides, not that it's a two-sided, everything is two-sided. There can be four sides, I'm sure, but that it's okay to take your step back and take care of yourself and say, and I think that's why I had brought up earlier the point of people saying, it's okay to agree to disagree. And I think it's that moment of stepping back and saying, I'm not okay with disagreeing with you. I'm stepping back because I'm not okay with disagreeing with you. And I'm protecting myself in that. And I don't need to have any more conversation.
Really, I think that is beautifully said. And stepping away from a conversation or ending a conversation doesn't necessarily mean you agree with it and you're letting it stand, but it is so that you can take care of yourself and have the capacity to have another conversation at another time. It might not even be with that same person. It might not be with on the same subject, right? But it is, part of this is sometimes we're so all or nothing. Well, now I have to be prepared to have a conversation with every stranger on the street who's wearing a shirt that has a slogan on it I don't agree with. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about when are times and places that it is safe and appropriate for me to have more of a conversation that calls on me to be kind, compassionate, and courageous.
I could offer one comment just back to listening to everybody in the room talk, is everybody shared a story. And I just want to clarify that for me, there's several kinds of listening. One is, when you don't know somebody and particularly if you don't know, how they got to their position or what they're stating, listening to their story is a good way to avoid confrontation and argument. And just a little more generally, but very, very quickly and simply, I think as I think about it, there are three kinds of listening. A lot of the listening I do is to ideas. I've always loved ideas and I love to share ideas. The other kind is listening to stories. That's more interpersonal. And the third kind of listening is listening to your own story, listening to your self-talk. I don't want to sound expert on this, but I realize it's something that I've done through my life. And I heard actually somebody who has been studying self-talk and has decided that, some people have constant self-talk, some people don't have constant self-talk, and some people don't have any self-talk at all. We're different that way. And I sort of fall into the in-between category. And generally in my life, when I've recognized my self-talk as negative, I've made a change. That's the word I hear and I don't like. So I think I've got to change something about the way I'm doing this. And, I think we need to do a little more listening to our own self-talk. That would be my conclusion, the most helpful thing you can do is turn off your self-talk so that you're not interrupting. It makes you a better listener. And, you know, crosstalk, for instance, that concept I learned from years of Al-Anon. And it was a great experience. I wish I'd done it 50 years ago.
We all need to be an Al-Anon, right? or some 12-step program. I think of self-talk, so, you know, I think I have a lot of self-talk going on sort of constantly, and she's kind of grumpy. One part of that is, what is the story I'm telling myself about this person? And that's one of the things I've had to be particularly attentive to, that I can have a whole novel written about somebody in my head based on one statement they make, except I don't think it's a novel. I think it's like a biography. And how often, you know, down the road, I find out that I'm wrong. So watching the ways in which I tell those stories about people, as well as the stories I'm telling myself about myself. So Donna, did you have your hand up?
I did before, and I just quickly wanted to insert that conservative isn't necessarily a bad word, and that we should be careful, because sometimes conservative can mean you're conserving the best. You're conserving what's best in a practice or in a community or whatever. So we shouldn't always jump to conclusions that, oh, this is the conservative approach and that's terrible. And the other thing is that inviting, I have no doubt that the red people have more difficulty in a conversation, but it's hard. You take an issue by like gender and biological sex, and if you have people who just are insistent that there are only two sexes, and there is no give and take on that, and you are discriminating against Christians, and it's very, very hard. I mean, I think Rick's comments on listening is really important. We all have to become like good listeners. And there's probably something in what everybody says. And I felt like I got crucified for saying that in the parents' rights group, there was attention to parents and families that is important. We don't have children's rights. We've never signed the Declaration of Children's Rights in this country. So it's not an insignificant point, but it's really hard to do. I hope you come back and do a boundary talk for us.
Oh, I would love to talk about boundaries. Is so important and so interesting. Yeah.
Oh boy. And who is this?
And on that note, I would also love to say, I would love for you to come back and have a conversation about words, because to Donna's point, I do believe that so much of what happens in our disagreements and our problems is because of word labels and the meanings that people have put onto words. And
I'm working with a young couple right now who's getting ready to get married, and like some of the most fun work I get to do is with a couple, you know, with a young couple. And what was very clear in their last session was like the definition of words was like the biggest challenge in their relationship, because one of them would use a word and they both had, like, again and again, they had such quick assumptions about what the words meant without checking anything out, because they're coming from two different family systems where those words meant certain things, and now they have to translate for each other. I don't think that happens just in marriage. I know it's 10:30. I know we have to go. I did just want to say one thing. You know, Donna made me think of this when she said discriminating against Christians. One of the reasons I think that it is so important for me to do this work as a pastor in the Christian tradition is because Christianity has so often been something that was making a lot of noise without doing as much listening, and has been a part of the divisions and helped build so many silos in our country, that I think it is particularly the responsibility of those of us who understand ourselves to be in the Christian tradition to do this work, and in particular to be willing to listen to others. So I just want to finish. I just read this book by Rabbi Sharon Bruce that I love. It's called The Amen Effect. And I'm going to paste in the quote. I was listening to it on Audible, and I played this sentence over and over again because I loved it so much. Human understanding is no substitute for real accountability and for systemic change. What we've been talking about today, human understanding, it is no substitute for real accountability and for systemic change. We still know these things. But it is also not an impediment to those righteous outcomes. If anything, it may be a prerequisite. So my hope, while I don't want to try to convince anybody of anything, I have this little conviction that our understanding of each other could in fact help us bring about accountability and systemic change. So thank you for letting me be with you today. Thank you for being so willing to wade in on all this.
I have an exciting announcement. Cindy doesn't know this, but she's agreed to come back once a month, every month.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, clearly, thank you so much for your time. This has been a different Coffee with a Purpose than many of ours. And
Put her on the payroll.
yeah, sure, yeah. I'll give her just as much money as Sarah and I get. Thank you so much, Cindy. It's been terrific. Martin, I think you could probably turn off the recording, and then